lot of young people know nothing about Julian Assange or WikiLeaks. Do you know who Julian Assange is? Do you know anything about this man and what's happened to him? Do you want to know about him?
Sure.
About 10 years ago, WikiLeaks released a whole lot of information about the crimes that were being committed by Western governments, basically, war crimes, but mostly the US government, and particularly the murder of innocent civilians.
Come on, fire!
Before that, we could just pretend to not know. And this is the fascinating thing about WikiLeaks. It kind of forced us to acknowledge it. You know, we couldn't ignore it anymore.
Clear.
He's an idealist. He's on a mission. He's on a mission to empower people with information.
WikiLeaks is obviously good, but this comes with a price.
How long has he been in jail for?
He was in the Ecuadorian embassy for 8 years, 7 or 8 years.
Oh, wow.
A long, long time he's been imprisoned, basically. And now he's been for many months in Belmarsh prison. There are a lot of people that want him in prison, a lot of very powerful people.
This department is conducting a thorough, aggressive investigation to determine how this leak occurred, to identify the person or persons responsible.
I don't want to see him die in a US prison. And I think that's what he's facing.
But he's just trying to make the world a better place.
Yeah, well, we think so. There's hardly any reason to suggest that he's not. He's trying to expose the crimes that our governments are committing in our name.
I don't think you can really understand Julian Assange or WikiLeaks without seeing an aspect of his life that formed him, and that was absolutely here in Melbourne. And it formed him not only in terms of his ideas, perhaps parts of his personality, his expertise, but also his conceptual thinking about forming software projects, including WikiLeaks. So Melbourne in the late 80s and early 90s became the center of the Australian underground, which included hackers and experimenters, and also hackers not just in the sense of people who broke into things illegally, but also people who just experimented with things.
It didn't take long for Australia's hacking community to embrace the young Julian Assange. As teenagers, they spent most of their time online, but did occasionally venture outdoors. And when they did, they'd meet in this square in central Melbourne.
This is the historic Fitzroy Town Hall, and it was the site, along with some other historic town halls in Melbourne, of swap meets. Julian Assange and other members of that technology community were here in their late teens and early 20s, shopping for computer bits and exchanging ideas and information about how to experiment with hardware and software.
At a young age, he was a part of the earliest cohort of young men and women who moved into understanding computers. It suited his organisational capacity and his patience, his curiosity, and his depth of memory and understanding of the topology of computing. But I didn't at all anticipate that he would be for a short while world famous and run one of the world's most powerful news organisations.
It's very interesting, the hacker mentality from this time period. They wanted the thrill of getting into the system that was taboo. And the more prestigious the institution, the more thrill they got. So if they could break into a NASA computer, I mean, these were the smartest people in the world. They were the people who had put man on the moon. Really, if you could break into their systems, then you could prove to yourself, you're a 17-year-old boy, you too are very smart.
The US space agency NASA is one of the victims of the Melbourne computer hacking syndicate. American investigators, including the FBI, contacted Australian authorities with their suspicions.
On October the 16th, 1989, NASA was attacked by what was known as the wank virus. It caused a space shuttle launch in Florida to be postponed and was traced to Australian hackers in Melbourne.
The wank worm was one of the first ever worms that had been written, and it was certainly the first politically motivated worm in that it carried a political message. That message was a quote from a Midnight Oil song, and that quote was, "You talk of times of peace for all, and then prepare for war." This thing that was the wank worm, it emerged from a sort of deep, dark forest. You got a glimpse of it, and then disappeared again. And the authors have never been found.
Although some say this might be one of Julian Assange's first dealings.
People have lots of different views on these things. Julian was very lucky growing up in that although he grew up in a fairly poor family economically, it was very rich intellectually. Julian's father is a very clever and creative person and quite sensitive. I think he's been enormously important to Julian's development as a young adult.
As a young man, Julian was a delight, actually. His nickname was Wizard because he would always be able to come up with a new approach to things, a new way of looking at things.
What a number of hackers have said to me is that they get a different perspective on the world from the systems they've been in, and that's because they are able to see the actual information. These are directly contradicting what an organization may say publicly or a politician may say publicly. They understand that the public is being told something that is just, not just a little lie, often it's a very big lie. That helped maybe develop in Julian's mind the super importance of media organizations being able to report accurately on information.
Julian was at my place and we were having a cup of tea. I think it was, I'm not sure, 2006 or something like that, quite early on anyway. And Julian said, I'd like to start a wiki. And this wiki would concern itself with leaks. And we would use the Tor as an anonymizer for people who wanted to leak information and have that information published.
Did you try to warn him about anything at that time?
No, why would you? A young man on the cusp of life. You don't give warnings, you say, well, how can I help? Well, I've always taken Nietzsche's aphorism to heart, live dangerously. Live dangerously. Don't creep around the place being frightened of shadows. Do what you have to do and face the consequences as the best you can. That has been my guide all my life.
Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18, have 5 to 6 individuals with AK-47s. Request permission to engage.
Roger that. We have no personnel east of our position, so you are free to engage, over.
I first heard about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange from the helicopter footage in Iraq, the famous footage where we saw the helicopter shoot people on the ground.
Light them all up. 02 traffic 260. Come on, fire. Roger. Keep shooting.
The helicopter shot up some civilians and in the process shot two Reuters journalists, two local Reuters journalists. And they also shot up some children in a car.
Got a bunch of bodies laying there. Alright, we got about 8 individuals. Yeah, we got one guy crawling around down there, but yeah, we definitely got some. We're shooting some more.
American military personnel misidentified civilians as rebels. From overhead, it looked as though one of the men had a gun. But it was just a Reuters cameraman holding a long lens.
That's a weapon, yeah.
The day I saw the collateral murder video is a day I will not forget, you know. I will not forget because it was the first time I was screaming loud at my office. These soldiers act as with this emotional detachment as they were playing video games, ending with the life of people in such a cold way.
Oh yeah, look at those dead. Nice.
Here is actual shocking video footage, fact, irrefutable evidence of what happened and what has been described to me by one retired military person actually here in Australia as undoubtedly a war crime.
1-8, we also have one individual.
The day after the shooting of July the 13th, 2007, US military command justified the attack, claiming that its troops had been in battle with hostile forces.
You guys have my turb over.
Now, Bushmaster, we have a van that's approaching and picking up the bodies.
But two children were also wounded. They were in a van when their father approached the scene of the shooting to help victims.
Bushmaster, Crazy Horse, we have individuals going to the scene. Looks like possibly picking up bodies and weapons. Come on, let us shoot.
This is Bushmaster 7, Roger, engage.
1-8, engage. Clear. Come on. Clear. Clear. Clear left.
What was really fascinating for me was when I saw an interview with an American soldier who was there on that spot after they killed them and shot them.
He was the young army officer who went to the van and discovered there were two children there that were wounded. He said the little girl couldn't blink because her eyes were full of glass, and he tried to remove the glass from her eyes. When he spoke to his supervisor and wanted to take her to a decent hospital, he was told, "Wash out your vagina."
Oh, it's their fault for bringing their kids to a battle. That's right.
For the first time, we understood the civilian casualties, the innocent people who were killed in both Afghanistan and Iraq. And this was all kept from the public.
Julian Assange showed real bravery in being willing to publish, frankly and fearlessly, that video. And I think that there are people within the US military who have never forgiven him for it.
That helicopter attack resulted in 12 to 18 deaths. 2 children were wounded. No one from the American military has ever been held accountable.
Just a few months ago, most people had never heard of a website called WikiLeaks or of its mysterious and eccentric founder, Julian Assange.
Julian Assange! Incredibly important revelation from WikiLeaks website, Julian Assange.
WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange.
After collateral murder, Julian Assange revealed his identity and was known. I mean, it was front page news all over the world at that point, yeah.
Not only did Julian Assange become a hot global topic, but he'd found a way to publish classified information and made it available to anyone who wanted to share someone else's secrets.
The idea of developing an anonymous digital Dropbox and applying it to a media organization that is WikiLeaks, that was a first. People hadn't really done that before. That was Julian Assange.
It enabled the whistleblower at low cost, with just the right connectivity and the use of the right tools, to anonymously blow the whistle by transmitting like large amounts of data.
Today, we release over 287 files documenting the reality of the international mass surveillance industry. So who here has an iPhone? Who here has a BlackBerry? Who here uses Gmail? Well, you're all screwed.
What is this place and where were all those files actually kept?
I don't know, it's in the cloud. I don't know, it's somewhere.
Julian magically brought together computers, digitalisation and information and put those before the public.
When someone called Julian Assange knocked on the door of the Frontline Club, I was quite pleased to see him. I was quite keen that we would have somebody who was making the news. My name's Vaughan Smith. I'm a journalist, but more, I run something called the Frontline Club, which I founded, which is a press club for journalists in London. It all happened in this room. I mean, Julian literally turned up and knocked on the door, and literally, unannounced, he knocked on the door 2 days before that press conference, saying, I want a press conference, I'm Julian Assange, quite literally. And so we arranged the press conference for him, and it was on a Monday morning. He was standing here, he was up here, and we had a podium. We had that podium, and we had it here, and he was standing here, and it's from this position he raised up the Guardian front page. You know, that's when the whole thing started.
So this is The Guardian from this morning, 14 pages about this topic. Also concurrently in Der Spiegel, 17 pages.
Just a couple of months after video of the Baghdad helicopter attack against civilians was published, yet more revelations appeared. This time, it was the Afghanistan and Iraq dossiers. The Afghanistan and Iraq dossiers. Classified Pentagon files on US and Allied military activity in Afghanistan and Iraq from 2004 to 2009.
These were logs that were written by members of the military who might be out at the front or patrolling an area, and might be things they've seen or something they experienced on their shift or patrol.
So it was almost a sort of a very detailed war diary by the Americans and the British. But it didn't occur to me that it could be so informative because it was a huge data set.
It's 400,000 classified reports, field reports by the US Army. This is the most accurate description of a war that has ever been released into the historic record. We have counted now 122,000 civilian casualties in the war. There's nearly no street corner in Baghdad that didn't have a body found that had been killed through violence of one form or another.
What we found out from the Iraq and Afghanistan dossiers. The US and its allies allegedly underreported civilian casualties. Prisoners of war were subjected to violent acts of torture. US military personnel were reportedly involved in child prostitution.
When you have publishers publishing secrets, the government starts losing control of the narrative. They had a narrative in Iraq, no civilian deaths. And then they lost control of that narrative because we found out the truth. That's the power of WikiLeaks.
The battlefield consequences of the release of these documents are potentially severe and dangerous for our troops, our allies, and Afghan partners, and may well damage our relationships and reputation in that key part of the world.
One of the main criticisms that's been levelled at you is that you have published the villages, the names, and in some cases the GPS coordinates of people, Afghans who've cooperated with the US military. And a US official has called it a potential hit list for the Taliban. What's your response to that?
Yeah, well, this appears to mostly be a media beat-up. I mean, we're looking at the issue seriously to see whether that is true. We approached the White House to ask them for assistance in reviewing material before we published. The White House did not accept that request.
They always say, oh, they have bloods on their hands, they get people in danger, but I think if anyone would have been killed because of WikiLeaks, they would have dragged the person in front of the camera or proved it or taken it against them. So I think it's just a blatant lie.
Is it possible that the first tranche of data from the Afghan war logs could have been better redacted? Yes, quite probably. They could have been better redacted. Had anyone ever done this before? No. There was no roadmap. I mean, Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, they were bushwhacking through a thick forest to try and figure out how to do this.
The Afghanistan and Iraq dossiers were the biggest leak ever, and shone a light on war crimes allegedly perpetrated by the US and its allies. No one from America's military has ever been held accountable.
A little bit over 10 years ago, I was contacted by a person who I didn't know at that point in time at all, that wanted to meet with me, and I met a person who spoke with a very strong Australian accent, and he told me that he had a program that he wanted to do, a project. When we met, my initial feeling was that this was completely outlandish, that there was nothing to it. So we parted way, but we kept contact, and a little bit later came the publications of the collateral murder video, where you could see a helicopter gunning down, that's a US helicopter in Iraq, gunning down Reuters journalists on an open street. And soon I realized that he was serious about his endeavor.
Julian Assange invited Johannes to work with him on a new collection of classified documents that had fallen into WikiLeaks' hands. This time, correspondence from the United States Diplomatic Service.
The diplomatic cables that WikiLeaks published a little bit later, they were a set of internal briefings, if you put it this way, or analysis that all of the American diplomats wrote and delivered back to the State Department.
Leaked US diplomatic cables. Published on November the 28th, 2010, it contains US diplomatic correspondence from 1966 to 2010 and includes 100,000 documents marked confidential and 15,000 marked secret.
We have to understand the scale of this release of information. So if we took these cables and we printed them out end to end, they would go between St. Petersburg and Moscow. It is that much material.
I can give you a simple example of what was of interest in those cables in regard to Sweden, because I worked with the materials that were related to Sweden. In these documents, we could see that Swedish politicians that would come to the US ambassador and ask for services. So the services they would ask for would be, well, we have a problem with the Swedish public opinion, they would say. Swedish public opinion doesn't like the war in Afghanistan, and they don't want us to participate in the war in Afghanistan. Could you please help us by inviting some Afghani women here to Sweden, and we'll put them on Swedish TV so they can talk about the good things that we're doing there. Suddenly we found out that Swedish politicians and Swedish public servants undercutting the way that Swedish democracy is supposed to function, and they're doing that together with US diplomats, contrary to the interests of the Swedish people.
One of the hopeful things that I've discovered is that nearly every war that has started in the past 50 years has been a result of media lies. What does that mean? Well, that means basically populations don't like wars. And populations have to be fooled into wars.
He should be treated as an enemy combatant. WikiLeaks should be closed down permanently and decisively.
This guy's a traitor, a treasonous, and he has broken every law in the United States.
WikiLeaks walks like a hostile intelligence service and talks like a hostile intelligence service.
And I'm not for the death penalty, so if I'm not for the death penalty, I'm going to do it. Illegally shoot someone.
Julian was at his height of popularity when Sweden happened. He attracted amorous ladies.
It's understandable that he would be attractive to young women. He's a young man who's set his ambitions very high, and they're noble ambitions. So that made him even more attractive.
Julian Assange travelled to Sweden to deliver a speech. While there, he met two women, aged 31 and 26. The WikiLeaks founder was soon involved in an intimate relationship with both of them.
The woman who had invited him to speak also offered her apartment, which is a studio apartment. So there's only one bed in it, and she said, "I'm going to be away, you can stay here." So he thought, great. However, things changed, and the woman came back early and wanted Julian to stay there anyway.
Those women really approached him. It seems like especially the younger ones saw him on TV, fell in love, whatever that means with a person. It looks like someone who wants to be a rock and roll groupie or something, approaching him and really chasing him down. And finally she also succeeds in it, and they share a one-night stand, which at some point becomes about a condom, you know.
It was only after learning that Assange had slept with both of them that the women decided to go to the police. That proved a turning point both for WikiLeaks and for Julian Assange. And it was when this story took a very different turn.
The women went to the police and weren't there to report a rape. They wanted to encourage Julian to have an HIV test because they'd had sex with him unprotected and were concerned about that.
So there was no, actual rape, right? There was no violence there. Although all the newspapers afterwards, they were saying rape allegations. There was no actual rape. There was consensual sex.
That was the aim of the whole exercise. To start hearing the word rape in connection with Julian Assange.
Rape investigation into WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange.
Into WikiLeaks founder Julian
Assange is being questioned over the rape allegations. Rape case against Assange in Sweden.
Women who accuse him of rape allegation.
In many people's minds, there's something suspicious about him and unethical because he's run away from the law.
I think it would have been better had he gone to Sweden because I think he needed his opportunity to clear his name. But at the same time, I completely understand why he didn't do it.
The problem in Sweden, well, it's not a country where I understand the language. In addition, a media climate has been set up in Sweden that is quite hostile.
I think that if Julian went to Sweden at that point, he would have been extradited. He was often mocked in the press, and people would say, he just wants to, he doesn't want to face the music in Sweden and so on, and said he's paranoid. But I think from today's perspective, and we really know now that the US is really after him, I think he was never paranoid.
thing that I think truly undermined the public support for Julian was the Swedish case, obviously. You would find newspapers of high repute, television stations too, doing Julian in, and it became gratuitous.
I think it would be fair to say the mainstream old-style media never really liked Julian. They didn't really like Julian because his model of publishing was a threat to their existence.
And there was a great deal of jealousy in the mainstream towards WikiLeaks and towards Assange in particular. Why won't he be more like us? Why can't he be one of us?
When they wanted access to the documents, they were the nicest persons in planet Earth. And now they cannot even, write us a little note with respect, informing about his case.
In the moment they collided with him, they took the information he had, but then immediately, let's say the next day, you had a hit piece in the New York Times from Bill Keller, he was editor-in-chief at that time, who described him as a bag lady. He came immediately something about his character.
Do I think that that is a betrayal? It's a betrayal of principles.
What do you think of the allegations that Julian Assange is, and the direct quote from the New York Times is that he's a narcissist with an outsized view of his own importance and that he has no interest in mundane matters like personal hygiene?
Oh, really? I can't think of another journalist or publisher who has won major international journalism awards and for whom media organizations have complained about whether his socks were dirty or he hadn't washed his hair. I mean, really?
I wonder whether any single human being has been subjected to that level of smear in the past. It was extraordinary.
In 2011, a British court released Assange on bail, on condition that he didn't leave the country. He was also required to remain at the country house owned by a close friend, the British journalist Vaughan Smith.
Well, I'm now sitting in a chair in my drawing room in Ellingham Hall. It's a sort of house that is the product of wealth that my family has generated for hundreds of years. My family moved here in 1795, and I'm fortunate to have that responsibility to look after it.
Vaughan Smith is an investigative journalist and also war journalist who kindly offered this very big, secure place to be the place from where the publications will be made.
Do you feel safe here?
I feel as safe as one can be. Yes, it's always a bit safer. Would feel much safer if I was here and no one knew I was here. But as far as the building and grounds is concerned, this is about as good as you get.
WikiLeaks basically turned this into their office for quite a while. So you would have come in here and you'd have found people working on computers, bits of paper, printouts everywhere, running around with these little discs and things like this. So that involved having Julian, it involved having the people that work for him, it involved having everybody who wanted to interview him. But this was the main office, this was WikiLeaks headquarters.
That is the place where a lot of work later down the road also came to happen. But I would say that the big publications of Cablegate, they were conducted while Julian was in house arrest in Ellingham Hall.
because it was so secret. You'd be here and you'd see people working on the computers, and you know, I wouldn't like ask because it was, you'd be looked at and they'd wonder, you'd think, oh gosh, what a silly question. Why should I ask what they'll tell me if they want to tell me. I saw them release the Afghan war logs. I saw them working on the diplomatic papers, and I saw them working on some stuff that came afterwards when they were here. It's interesting how it's very hard to stop organizations like WikiLeaks, and that WikiLeaks isn't going to be the end of it, even if WikiLeaks disappears, which there's no sign that it will. It's become a sort of guerrilla organization for freedom of speech. I first heard that Julian was in the Ecuadorian embassy the morning after he went to that embassy, because I read it in the news and realized that I'd just lost my bail money.
Julian Assange went to the embassy of Ecuador and asked for asylum.
Assange has been granted political asylum by Ecuador.
Julian Assange set foot into the Ecuadorian embassy in London.
There is no indication that even though he has been granted asylum, and if he steps out, he won't be arrested by British police.
Well, this is the Ecuadorian embassy where Julian Assange lived for nearly 7 years. The embassy is only the one of the 2 flats in the first floor. So what you are looking at the balcony, the only balcony that the embassy has, which in fact was Julian's room in the last 5 years.
Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, who's refusing to leave the Ecuadorian embassy in London, is expected to make his first public comment this afternoon.
I am here today because I cannot be there with you today.
We knew each other before he came to the embassy, and basically the possibility of Ecuador protecting him arise from that friendship. That was his last resource.
No tiene miedo a ningún tipo de represalias.
Pero que objetivamente no podemos excluir represalias, pero sería algo atroz. Mire la propia amenaza del Reino Unido, que puede entrar a nuestra embajada a arrestar a Assange. ¿Qué precedente se sentaría? Tiene muchísimos asilados, y un país...
The embassy itself, the Ecuadorian embassy itself, is small. It's a flat. It's a 3-bedroom flat. Julian, when he first went there, was contained to 1 room. So he had half of the room to sleep in and half of the room to run WikiLeaks from.
The building is surrounded by high buildings, which does not allow for the sunlight to come into the embassy. Julian compared his stay at the embassy to be living in a spaceship because he was subjected only to artificial light.
And he never saw sunlight. He didn't have dental care, proper medical care. There were huge challenges.
First years he was constantly under surveillance there, like open surveillance. And when you were in the embassy, you could constantly hear the people outside with the speaking on walkie-talkie. There was nearly no corner in the embassy where you were not watched.
In the surrounding buildings, we also had long-range video cameras pointing at the embassy all the time. This was the most surveyed place in the world for many years.
Julian Assange continued to run WikiLeaks during his stay at the Ecuadorian embassy. While within its walls, many new publications and revelations came to light. The highest profile exposés probably appeared in 2016, the year in which a new president was to be elected in the USA.
To do one thing, make America great again.
lot of people I meet believe that Julian Assange delivered us Trump. And that came from the fact that he put into the public domain some what are called the DNC leaks. Basically, they were emails from the Democratic Party.
These outlined how the Democratic National Council had done its best to remove the most popular Bernie Sanders to place Hillary Clinton as the contender for the presidential election.
And that was something that I think shocked the American public.
What's really important about WikiLeaks is that the Russian government has engaged in espionage against Americans. Then they have given that information to WikiLeaks for the purpose of putting it on the internet.
We've learned about something called Guccifer 2.0 and various other DC leaks and various other, memes which are supposed to convince us that this information was from Russia. Well, I don't know. I don't know whether it was from Russia. I don't know where Julian got the leaks. Julian hasn't told me. Julian says it wasn't.
This quoting has to do with that we intend to harm Hillary Clinton, or that I intend to harm Hillary Clinton, or I don't like Hillary Clinton. All those are false.
When they revealed those dirty facts about Hillary, the whole hypocrisy behind it and so on, everybody was saying, yeah, but it's not so bad. But when she lost the election, everybody said like, oh my God, this was the reason why it happened, because they needed some explanation.
The reception of those cables was pretty nasty, and there was even this outrage and this hate. Make him stop, make Assange stop, kick him out of the embassy, silence him, gag him.
When the years went by, his situation became more difficult and difficult, the pressure became bigger and bigger, and then the government changed in Ecuador. I think the situation became really grave.
There was an election in Ecuador, and Moreno Lenin became president, and he was a great supporter of America, still is.
The new government decided to shift Ecuadorian foreign policy. They decided to have a different relationship with the United States. Julian was an obstacle for that.
Jamás he estado de acuerdo con la actividad que realiza el señor Assange. Nunca he estado de acuerdo con las intervenciones en los correos privados de la gente para poder obtener información, por más valiosa que ésta sea para sacar a la luz ciertos actos indeseables de gobiernos o de personas. No es la forma.
The Moreno government was determined that they had to get rid of him, and turned his life into hell.
Turning away lawyers, searching visitors, installing cameras in every room, and private meetings had to be held in the toilet, not supplying toilet paper. Every cruel...
Not supplying toilet paper?
No, just forgetting, so to speak. Forgetting to bring food, forgetting to bring milk.
If they forgot to bring food for Julian, then it means what?
He doesn't eat.
Señor Assange, sin duda alguna, creo que ustedes lo conocen, es un problema heredado.
Well, I have to ask this because, according to the security firm employees who are hired by the Ecuadorian government, Julian was an extremely difficult guest himself. In particular, he argued with the embassy staff a lot, he neglected personal hygiene, often left his bathroom and small kitchen in a mess.
This is in the 18 months of the Moreno government you're talking about. That's right. Why is it that none of that emerged for the preceding 6 years? Did he change personalities all of a sudden?
They accuse him of smearing feces on the walls, which is mad. It's a lie.
They wanted to have proof and reasons to throw him out, to take away his asylum, which is really an international humanitarian scandal.
Hoy anuncio que la conducta irrespetuosa y agresiva del señor Julian Assange han llevado la situación a un punto en que el asilo del señor Assange es insostenible e inviable.
This was the first time in 10 years when I saw him, I could really see the toll it took on him, you know. It was like, I was shocked.
If you do cut back to 2011, when, you know, he's youthful and lively and sweet and makes jokes, and to see him, you know, after 18 months of torture and 7 years of being locked up, dragged out by those 7 policemen, he looked very old. Not at all useful anymore.
Stay strong, Julian. We're fighting for you. We won't let them do it to you. We won't let them do this to you. Stay strong. Remember, we're here for you. Remember that. Stay strong. You will be free.
The United States immediately filed an extradition request with the UK. But it could not be considered until Julian Assange had served 11 months in prison for breaching the terms of his home detention in 2012 and escaping to the Ecuadorian embassy. The WikiLeaks founder was sent to Belmarsh prison just outside London.
The Belmarsh prison where Julian is currently housed is a high security, maximum security prison. It's where you keep murderers and terrorists and bombers and brutal people.
Belmarsh prison is said to be a worse place even than Guantanamo.
He is denied the right of fraternizing with other prisoners. He told me that when he sees people go past his cell, he wished he could speak to them.
I saw those leaked videos where he appears to have lost a lot of weight. When I saw that, I really started crying, because when you know someone very well and see him in this position...
You're not allowed to hand him anything. The only way of communicating with the outside world is for him to receive letters.
We were not sure if he wanted to communicate with journalists. But here's a letter we've just received from Belmarsh prison, and it's from Julian Assange, as it says here on the back.
That letter reveals despair and frustration as the trial draws closer. The WikiLeaks founder says he has no internet or telephone access, which seriously hinders his ability to prepare his own defense, and that he has nothing much to do except walk thousands of laps per day around the cell.
It's very distressing to see someone you have worked with and who is an old friend in such peril, personal peril. And to think that they may not come out of it is very upsetting.
The
charges that the US government have raised against Julian to extradite him have shifted. At first, they called him a hacker and said that he had assisted Manning in securing the information that Manning wanted.
Well, Bradley Manning was a young man who was in the armed forces and clearly was shocked by what was going on around him.
Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning, was the original whistleblower who gave WikiLeaks their most important information. The Afghan war logs, the film from the helicopter, the Reuters journalist being killed, the diplomatic papers, all came from Bradley Manning.
The way the US Ministry of Justice sees it, Julian Assange didn't just receive information from an informant, which would not constitute a crime. Journalists do have the right to acquire information from sources, even if it is classified. The American government claims that Assange conspired with Private Manning, who helped him access classified information intending to harm the United States. The US hopes to prove that Assange is a spy, not a journalist.
If you look at the charges, they are absolutely applicable to potentially other journalism or media publications.
If Julian Assange, being a publisher, is put in prison for being a publisher, for no other reason than being a publisher, then we have no rules. There are no rules to the game.
Every journalist in the United States should feel a cold, icy hand running down their spine at the charges that have been leveled against this publisher, because they could be next.
Dear Julian, you are one of the most bravest person I know, and the sentence that you repeated often, courage is contagious, was really true.
That's the reason that great movements arise. You have millions, I would think, of people who support you and understand that there is a wider issue at stake here.
He's not alone. He is not alone. You know, there are a large number of people who value the contribution he has made reporting in the public interest.
I remember you, Julian, when you were not as famous and when you were relatively free. And I remember that you were just, carrying this little backpack and having a very humble life.
I would look forward to a day where he's free and not being monitored and not being chased around the world by the Americans.
I hope that we can get you out of there and you will be sitting next to us somewhere nice, something warm by the sea, and this will be like just a bad memory.
We have a lot to thank you for.